joining us today. Please make sure you put your contact information in the Zoom chat and any relevant information you would like to share in addition to all of the fun conversations that we're already seeing popping up here. And yes, today it's a beautiful day. Crazy weather though, crazy times, right? I have to say, as an allergy sufferer, it's been driving me nuts because I'm like, is it corona? Is it allergies, right? So we're all kind of questioning what's going on, but it is really nice to see some sunshine right now. I think we should probably get ourselves started. So other housekeeping, just a reminder, the GC Collaborative has been holding these daily Zoom chats every day, actually now since March 16th for you all, for the community. Our first response was to be here as a place for us to gather our community well, our community wishing well, if you will, just to check in and see how everyone is doing, what we can do together to mobilize and pivot our arts and humanities education learning resources for DC public schools and DC public charter schools, and as well as a platform for us to take care of ourselves as a community of practice. Because after all, the DC Collaborative is a membership organization. We're here to support everyone. These conversations have become really important for us, and we really appreciate being able to see your faces and hear from you every day. We've taken now into week 3, thanks to Tracy and team, we've been curating conversations, and we really want these conversations to be led by you all. After all, this is our community forum and platform. So today we're especially excited to have one of our dear, wonderful friends, member of the collaborative, Fareed from Pulitzer Center, to talk to us a bit. Yay, everyone, jazz hands for Fareed. We love Fareed. Fareed's gonna share a bit about Pulitzer's education programming, specifically their online resources and how they've continued to pivot right now, including Lesson Builder and of course, the Everyday DC Project, which has become this amazing program that really blossomed, I think, initially, as Fareed will share, through some opportunities that we helped to broker through the collaborative and DCPS, and now it's part of their regular programming. But it's really important for us to showcase and highlight some of the exemplars that are doing amazing work in our community. So before Fareed gets a chance to share out what he's been learning in further pivoting and what the Pulitzer Center is planning for interim and future, let's all give Fareed a round of applause and welcome Fareed to the conversation today. Jazz hands, yay, Fareed.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining today. What I put together was, I know many of you have heard a little bit about the Pulitzer Center. Some of you might have not. So I've got a brief look at what we do and also what it looks like during the school year, and then pivoting into the online stuff. If you at any point have any questions, just pop them into the chat. And Tracy, Alyssa, can you just interrupt me if there's some pressing questions in the chat? All right, well, I'm gonna share my screen and show you a little presentation I put together here. So I first wanted to start with telling you a little bit about me, that I've worked with a lot of you or seen a lot of you in a lot of different worlds, because here in DC, I've been in a couple different worlds. On the left here, this is me when I started teaching. I taught in Argentina right after graduating college. But then I came back and immediately started teaching in DC public schools. I was in the Teach for America program, so I taught at Truesdale, if anybody works at Truesdale. And I taught Spanish and ESL. And then while I was there, I transitioned into this center picture here. This is when I was in the community engagement department at Arena Stage. And I'm still a teaching artist there. I've been a teaching artist there for about 9 years now, but I was on the staff there for about 4.5 years. So you'll see some of the stuff, there's some theatrical work in the mix now, and that comes from the Arena Stage work. But basically what I learned over that time was that what I was most passionate about was the power of storytelling to cultivate critical thinking, connection, and ultimately empathy. And that's what led me to the Pulitzer Center, where I moved from using plays and original stories, fictional stories, to seeing how journalism can be a way to cultivate critical thinking and empathy. So that's sort of what we do at the Pulitzer Center. What we do in our mission is that we try to raise awareness for underreported issues, and we do that in two ways. The first is we offer direct support to journalists, so grants for journalists who are on staff or who are freelance journalists who basically have an idea that an editor wants to publish, but that outlet does not have the funding for the journalist to go and do that reporting. We give them that funding, and part of the deal is that then that journalism is also a part of our outreach work, where we try to take these stories that even when they're published easily get covered up by some breaking news issue. We wanted to make sure that we do outreach that helps get those stories more attention. We were founded basically in response to statistics like this. Our organization's about 14 years old, but what you see here in this 2016 Pew Research study reflects what has been happening for decades, which is that more and more news consumption moved from being in traditional print publications to online and television outlets. And actually, if you take a look at the demographics here in this study, we see that while it looks like most adults are getting their news from TV, when you go into the age groups, as you get younger, the numbers increase with the online access. And what that meant is a lot of news outlets that used to have foreign correspondents had to close out those positions. They had to move to more online models. And while there's a lot of good things about news being accessible online, diversifying voices, easier access, a lot of free news, what it did mean was less funding for stories that take time, that are in depth, and that might take place in places that aren't getting enough attention anyway. So what we do is, like I said, we provide grant funding, and last year we supported, actually it was about 180 projects. Some of these projects are done by freelance journalists who take the funding, go to a place to report a systemic issue. It might be a criminal justice issue, a health issue, and they might sell stories to several publications. So while it looks like here it was 150 projects, last year's 180, that might be thousands of pieces or hundreds of pieces of reporting. And it doesn't matter how the journalists report. We have videos, articles, photos. The only thing these stories have in common is that the issue is something that is not getting enough attention, underreported. To get the word out about these, you can see we're active on social media. We partner with the outlets to do public events, but we also have a K-12 department that I'm a part of to try to get some of these stories into the classroom. So in the past year, these are some of the news outlets that journalists we've given grants to have published in. Can I just see from a show of hands here on your screens, or you could let me know in the chat, have any of you seen a Pulitzer Center supported story before? Maybe you're not sure. I'm going to show you some, and you might find there's some that our credit might be at the bottom of the story. So you might have seen something we supported and didn't know. Here's some of the topics, because the ideas come from the journalists and not from us. It's different ways. I'm going to try and share this video with you so you can see some of the reporting from last year. Just interrupt if the sound doesn't work, okay? Whoops. Oh, there we go.
No
Maria, I
sound.
can hear the sound. It did work yesterday.
Can you hear it?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Well, let me see. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, why
in
don't
order
we do
for the sound to work, everyone has to be on mute, and then Fareed, you have to turn your volume all the way up so that it picks up on your laptop microphone.
Do y'all want to try it? All right, let's try
so
it.
everyone just mute your microphone, and then Fareed, you turn up the mic, your volume.
All right, let's try it one more time.
Less visible communities being overlooked by the kind of coverage that
We are simply putting forward the facts.
Often we see a lot of the more rural or maybe less visible communities being overlooked by the kind of coverage that's done with a quick turnaround.
Underreported stories, they're underreported for reasons. It usually has to do with our agenda setting.
It's driven by clicks and news cycles around things like disasters and elections. Of course, that doesn't tell the whole story about the world.
I think we're in trouble in our country. There's a lack of credibility for journalism among a lot of people that we have to rebuild. And I think we have to do it from the bottom up.
The grant from Pulitzer Center was indispensable for our work.
The Pulitzer Center offers funding and stability that means we can take more risks and try harder stories.
Our job was to go to Honduras and shed a light on the problems that are forcing people to flee.
We've been digging into what the on-the-ground impact of this growing opioid use has been in countries outside the U.S.
Modern slavery can take shape in various different forms.
It's where climate change, gold fever, and mercury poisoning meet.
What if I told you that the year 1619 is as important to the American story as the year 1776? We partnered with the Pulitzer Center on a curriculum. It's being taught in every state in America.
I've worked with students from 5th grade all the way through university level. It makes such a difference in how students are able to not only look at the news that's happening at something far away, but connect it to their own backyard.
Local journalism is really a bedrock for informed communities, making sure that our democracy works. And that's where we come in with bringing stories home.
As part of the Pulitzer Center's nationwide Connected Coastlines Reporting Initiative.
Tonight's report, produced in partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
This report is supported in partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
I want to thank the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting for giving me the support.
All right, and you got the idea there, we're a nonprofit. So if that felt a little like, and give us money, that was intentional. But I wanted to show you that, not for that reason, but to show you all the video that you see are either grantees doing outreach for their work, or it's actually footage from the work. Maybe I'll pause right there. Does anybody have any questions about the reporting side of Pulitzer Center right now? Okay. A lot of times I get the question, do we give out the Pulitzer prizes? And that we don't. A member of the family, the Pulitzer family, provided the seed funding for the Pulitzer Center, and another member of that family, Joseph Pulitzer, that's who the prizes are named after. So they're separate things. But one of our projects, for the first time in our 14 years history, won a Pulitzer Prize last year. So that was exciting. And it was a year-long Associated Press investigation into underreported stories in Yemen. So it was a really cool project. So let me tell you, saw on there that our education and outreach work. I want to show you why we do that. And that's basically in response to this. In the same study, do you see here how when we dig into that 1829 group, that's not exactly our students' ages, well, some of us, but where our students might be heading. Not only are students or young people following news less, they're trusting the news less, and they're also mostly checking websites and social networking sites for that information, which means they're not only feeling less trusting and engaging less, but they're looking in places where news is one of many things that are being presented to them. In response to this and the challenges that come with it, our education mission is this: cultivating a more curious, informed, empathetic, and engaged public. And our strategy there is connecting students and teachers with underreported global news stories, but also to the journalists who cover them. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. First of all, what we have for teachers, and if you're seeing, I see a lot of organizations on here. If you are seeing at any point that any of these resources could support your work, please let me know, because these are all things that we provide for free. Any piece of reporting that we have supported, we are allowed to post a version of that for free on our site. So you could see any Pulitzer Center reported story, even if you don't have a subscription to that outlet. We also have a bank of lesson plans, and we'll look at some of those in a bit, on our site connected to the reporting. About half of those are written by teacher partners and then half by the staff. We also, like you saw in the video, can use platforms to connect journalists directly to students virtually, and we've been really leaning on that in the context that we're in right now. We've also started doing workshops for students and teachers online, but we'll do them in person when we're not all quarantined. So our goals are essentially that, and this is actually, we're in the process of writing a theory of change. Hands up if any of your organizations have tried that process, the theory of change writing process. Whew, it's hard. So this is the early sneak peek, but essentially what we're thinking is that that through engagement with global news stories and the journalists who cover them, students will strengthen critical thinking, media literacy, communication, and connection skills they need to do these three things. And I want to show you some examples of what that looks like when we're not quarantined, and then what it looks like now. So here are a few examples. So that inform yourself side. Here's an example from Chicago where we worked with some teachers in Chicago public schools to engage with this story from the New York Times called Fractured Lands. Did anybody, hands up if you saw this story? It was 2016. It was the full issue of the New York Times Magazine dedicated to one story. I know a lot of us missed it, but if you, luckily it's available on our site for free. And basically what it was is journalist Scott Anderson used the stories of 6 people to, over the course of a decade, to answer the question, what is happening? How did the Middle East essentially start to fracture and become what it is now in terms politically? And it's focused on Libya, Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. So students started by engaging with the story. They read, in the classrooms we worked with, the story is 43,000 words. So the students did a jigsaw strategy where the chapters were broken up into small groups. And the only part that was read whole class was the introduction, which was about 5 pages. Then this teacher, Anne Michelle Boyle in Chicago, tried to cultivate empathy through having students track the timeline of events by creating a public timeline. And that's actually what you see at the top of the timeline here is the events from the story. On the bottom of the timeline is students trying to remember what they remember hearing about in the news from those times. And ultimately where they took action was she assigned them the project to create a children's book that communicated the stories of one of those people from the story, but to an elementary audience. The reason for that is to check, did they understand the content of what happened to that person? But also the journalist strategy was a narrative strategy. So she was actually encouraging them to apply the strategy by doing their own project. Both of these lesson plans are on our site, and I'll show you where to find them in a second. Cool side note about this image is that we were actually able to go to this school with the journalist Scott Anderson in 2017, and he took this picture and was able to send it to, if you see on the right here, the story about Hulot, that's a real person, and he was able to send that book to her, which is really cool. Another example here, we'll go to North Carolina. In this example, the teachers wanted students to be making a local connection. They were focusing on their own history, but we were trying to make a global connection. And in Winston-Salem, anyone heard of the Hanes brand? Yes, maybe we're wearing some Hanes brand stuff today. The Hanes brand is from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And so these students were exploring the history of textiles in their own communities, but the teacher then worked with us to have them understand that as the textile plants closed in North Carolina, where did the textiles industry go? So they explored this story from Bangladesh about the fall of the Rana Plaza factory. That was a factory that basically was producing clothes for Gap, for Zara, a lot of other companies that we see here. And the story looked at when one of those factories, due to poor conditions, actually caught fire and hundreds of people died. So what the teacher did with them is compare the story of Rana Plaza to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory and track some of that reporting on early textile factories back to their own communities. Students then also learned filmmaking skills, where once they made that local connection to this global story, they created a film about their learning. And that film and all of those lesson plans are also available on our site. Also, I'm wondering, Tracy, is there a way for me to get this presentation to everybody? Because the links are all in the presentation also.
Yes. Do you mind if I share the Google link you gave me? Okay, I could just put it in the chat right now. And then I'll share it on the community of practice listserv too.
Awesome. The last example I wanted to show you, because it might be something that you've been hearing about, or that your students and your teacher partners are interested in, is the 1619 project. Can I see a show of hands? How many of you have heard about this project before? Okay, a few of you. So the project was launched by another full issue of the New York Times Magazine. And basically the guiding question here is, what is the lasting legacy of slavery on modern day US systems? So this is the opening text for the project. Because it's such a lofty question, and the question is being asked because it was published in 2019, the 400th anniversary of 1619, when actually the first Africans were sold into slavery, into enslavement in what would become the US. That's sort of why the project is called the 1619 Project. The story was then explored by a lot of different people. We have 18 essays from leading journalists and historians exploring the lasting impact of slavery on healthcare, on the criminal justice system, politics, capitalism, sugar, even traffic in Atlanta is one of the stories. Why is traffic in Atlanta the way it is, and how does that relate to systems that were put in place as people were enslaved in the United States? Also, we have this question explored through creative writing. So poems and short stories by, I'm trying to think of some of the names that folks might recognize. Lynn Nottage, who wrote Ruin, she wrote one of the pieces for this. Barry Jenkins, who directed Moonlight, he wrote one of the pieces for this. The poems and short stories are trying to illuminate voices, underrepresented voices from US history, but through creative writing. There are photo essays. There's actually a print broadsheet with curated objects from the Smithsonian Museum of African American History to explore underrepresented stories of US history as it relates to the impact of enslavement, a podcast, and a kids section. So there's a lot of resources here. Here's some examples of ways that teachers tried this same sort of strategy: inform, cultivate empathy, and take action. Here we have teachers engaging with the project to create timelines. We have teachers inspired by the creative works, having students creating visual art and poetry inspired by the project. We even had, this is an event from Eastern High School in DC, where students actually engaged their school community and their local neighborhood in a school-wide event, where you can see they had blown up quotes for people to engage with. They had a place for people to reflect on these roses that you see on the right. They also had students dressed up as famous figures from US history who don't get enough attention, doing monologues. So it was a really incredible event. And here's an example where we also collaborated with community organizers and professors on a professional development event. All of this was inspired and using elements from a curriculum we have on our site. And I'm going to show you now where you can find any of our curricular pieces. First of all, any questions on any of the things I showed you so far? You might be thinking, how do you do any of this remotely? Good question. We've been trying to figure that out too. So I'll show you what we've been doing to do more work remotely. The first thing is, if you go to our site, luckily all the reporting and lesson plans are still there and accessible for free. So that's one way we've been trying to promote what teachers can be doing remotely. If you want to find any reporting, you can do it by clicking on this reporting tab. And what you'll see is a filter feature where you can filter reporting by issue, by media. So I know when I'm looking for reporting for teachers who are like, I don't have time, can you just help me find something? Anytime, you can do that. What I'll do is often start in this filter feature. If you want to find the lesson plans, you would just click here when you go to pulitzercenter.org/education. The first thing you'll see are the latest lesson plans, and you can see us here responding to the change in how students are engaging with school right now, right at the top. It has the same filter feature. And what we have here are lessons that try to highlight different issues, but also while engaging students in different skills. So here's a text analysis. This one is text and audio podcast analysis, documentary film analysis, text analysis of several texts as it relates to one topic, and even journalism skills. Oops. One thing that we did as more and more students went remote, I don't know if any of you have been trying to do this, is we realized our lessons are teacher facing. They've been written for a teacher to facilitate. So we've been going in and rewriting the lessons as printable student facing activities. Hands up if anybody tried that. Any luck with that? Yeah, I see you, Claudia. Yeah. So it's something that we've been trying. The engagement with it has been pretty good. I don't know about you. I've been noticing teachers are pretty overwhelmed right now and more just saying, thank you for this. I'll let you know. Go ahead, Claudia.
Yeah, I just kind of did a whole rewrite of our standard curriculum into slideshows and made it so it could be a script for anybody. And literally just like every time you click, a new directive pops up. So a student can sit there and follow along with it. I did it in my voice essentially. And so like someone can pick it up and read it, or a student can sit there and read it to themselves as if I were sitting there with them going through the lesson. So we're launching that this week and we'll see what happens.
That is awesome. Yeah, please. I hope, can we get Claudia on one of these next so we can hear how that goes? You can see this is one way we are experimenting and we're trying just different issues. One thing we are pivoting towards those, we started by trying to highlight stories about public health. We thought that's what teachers really wanted to be thinking about. How do we do have some reporting, underreported stories about about COVID-19 that you can look at on our site now as part of a partnership with Science Magazine. But we also thought, well, why don't we look at reporting from past grantees on past epidemics? So we created a PDF that focuses on identifying details and summary that could be used on any of the articles. But we then started to hear from teachers, actually, like, we need more stories about resilience and more positive, sort of uplifting stories about how communities come through conflict. So we're starting to move our printable activities in that direction. We're also going to start a series I'll talk about in a moment that focuses on that. Another, we were trying to offer students something actionable, as we have a contest running right now called Fighting Words, where students write poetry in response to global news stories. Please share this with your networks. When we get to the Q&A, I'll put the link in your in the chat so you can share. It's a really simple activity. Students can win money. They can win up to $100 publication on our site. It's also a really interesting way to see how students connect emotionally and personally to global stories. I thought maybe it would be interesting for you to see the winner from last year. So I'm just going to put that on the screen. Is there somebody else who would mind reading the poems so that we give your ears a break from my voice? Maybe Tracy, could you read this one?
Sure. I was hoping you would call.
Can you see it?
Yes. So The Joy of Togetherness by Taylor Jamie Yarnes in 11th grade, City Honors School, New York. So I sit in a classroom of 2.7 million future tragedies, boys that carry their parents' hope that their son will be the one to win a war that has never seen a victor, and girls that skip lunch to practice their smiles in the bathroom mirror and for their inevitable appearance on the milk carton. All of the toothy smiles I have loved since 3rd grade, nothing but collateral damage in the eyes of the law. The boy next to me hasn't stopped fidgeting all day. Exactly a year ago, his mama poked fun at his restlessness, told him that she would tie a bell around his neck so that she would hear him whenever he moved, and no one would ever take him away. Now he wishes that he had done the same to her. The boy's mother was in prison, and that is what he said when the teacher asked what had been troubling him.
What are some lines from the poem that popped for you?
Me or everybody?
Everybody, anybody.
The for their inevitable appearance on the milk carton. So that one popped.
Maybe one or two more people.
Yeah, the very beginning is super strong. Like sitting in a classroom of 2.7 million future tragedies, it immediately puts the speaker in the context of an entire generation. And the war that has never seen a victor, but that being juxtaposed with the parents' hope, this like eternal hope that like your child will be the one that succeeds in this like everlasting and ever losing battle is really powerful.
Thank you. One more. All right. Well, we can pause here. One thing that that if you take a look at, you see, this is the reporting story. Did you want to say something, Sylvia? I see you unmuted.
Thank you. I was just going to say it moved me when he said now he wishes that he had done the same to her.
And you can see this is the story that inspired this. Thank you all. It was from the Marshall Project by Jamie Joyce, who's also an editor at Time for Kids. And it's her reporting was on a program where children go to see their parents who've been incarcerated. And actually this poem, for example, the last line here, when the teacher asked what had been troubling him, that is a quote from the story. So that's one element of the project. Students just have to pick some lines from any piece of reporting and then build their poem around it. One thing that we've done to sort of use this as an anchor for remote learning is we've been doing virtual workshops for classes. We did our first public one last week on Zoom webinar. I mean, it went pretty well. I was doing the moderating while my colleague facilitated. I had to remove 3 students from the chat who were sort of saying inappropriate things in the chat box, but otherwise everybody participated. They were able to pick reporting, share lines they thought were exciting to them, even share some like short potential starts of poems. So it worked pretty well. We've been mostly doing this with individual classes, but that was that event I just described was open to anybody. And I think we're going to do it a couple more times, but it went pretty well. We've been doing a lot more virtual visits, so workshops like the poetry, but we've also been doing journalist talks on Zoom webinar. That's something we've tried. And it went pretty well. We've been getting between like 65 and 85 attendees. The journalist presents with a slide deck, and throughout what we've done is worked with that person to include polls throughout so that the students have opportunities to engage. And that's been really helpful. And so if any of the teachers you work with, or if you want to partner on getting a grantee who can speak about a reporting skill or an issue, that's something we'd love to partner with you on. Here's some folks we've been working with recently to do talks. And if you actually want to see what that's like, we have one today. The one today isn't for students, it's for the public, but we actually had a student webinar with this same person yesterday. It went really well. If you want to meet her, she's amazing, Dr. Seema Yasmin, who reported for us on Ebola, but she's been doing these amazing explainer videos for Wired about COVID-19. So this is at 2, it's free if you want to log in, but this is something that we've tried. So the printable lessons, the virtual workshops, and then the virtual talks with journalists. We've also been trying to do some webinars for educators. Hands up if you've been trying that. I feel like we're all trying. But this is one that we would love your help promoting. This is just going to be a conversation with educators about what's it like to teach through the news, whether that relates to COVID-19 or otherwise. So please share with your networks. We just finished the agenda or the schedule of a series of 6 webinars that we're going to publish this week. So we're going to be doing a bunch. And it's one of those things where, just to share personally with you, I think the engagement is going to vary on these. A part of me is just offering them so that teachers feel like there is something, if they want to engage, they can, they don't have to. But I know I'm not moving into this with huge belief that we're going to have huge numbers all the time. So that's sort of our strategy, more consistency and less about huge numbers. So I do have some slides, and I can to do a brief overview of Everyday DC, which is an in-person workshop, and I can show you how we're doing that online. But is it okay if I pause for a few minutes if anyone has questions? Can we do that? Any questions so far?
Hey, Fareed, this is Trey.
Hey, Trey.
I saw that you guys also, I know during the usual year, sometimes offer like journalist field trips or journalists calling into like classrooms. Is that true? Like digital field trips that way? How it would?
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Well, is anyone on the call on the DC Commission field trip grants? Any of you doing those? That's another thing that we've worked with the collaborative really closely on. So we had a grant from the commission to try a new thing where we taught visual storytelling skills like storyboarding for films, but we did that by taking students to news outlets, which is something we could also, if there's a way to partner on that. Stephanie was one of our hosts at AFI in September for one of the films that was a general documentary. So instead of going to a news outlet, we went to a nonprofit movie theater because that's a place where a full-length documentary would screen. So Stephanie generously hosted us. Because we've now had to cancel, I think we had 5 scheduled for the spring. We are exploring with PBS NewsHour, with Vox, and with National Geographic and USA Today, the idea of digital field trips.
That's fantastic. I think the virtual field trips are where we all will pivot this next year, even best case scenario, next school year, it's going to be a hybrid. Once the kids are even back in the classroom, just what that looks like. So I think these virtual trips are so important right now, and even what our new norm becomes. There is a question in the chat. I just wanted to make sure it got covered, and that's from Karen. Fareed, can you discuss how you address younger students? Do you have any early childhood programming? I know you're a K through 12.
Yeah. So luckily we partner with Time for Kids on a few different stories. So we often engage those when it comes to content for elementary audiences. With younger groups though, actually, when I go into Everyday DC, I can talk about that as one project I use a lot with elementary because it's more about what is a journalist and how do journalists tell stories. That's one project I've used. And in general, I focus on, with younger audience, what is news, what is a journalist, what is an underreported story I've been able to talk about with as young as 3rd grade. But also what I've done is more focus on the idea of there are different places in the world, and news is a way to learn about what's happening there, and use a lot of the photography and some select films. But a lot of the reporting is for adult audiences. So for elementary, I often work with the teacher to identify reporting that fits their goals and is age appropriate. But I wish we could do more.
This is Karen. I have a question.
Yes. Hi, Karen.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for this. I'm working with a number of different teachers and students, as we all are. And there's one group that I'm working with in Maryland, and we're doing a project on, they're 3rd graders, and it's a project on Africa, and I'm taking a botanical approach and working on flowers and food sustainability. And I was curious if there are any organizations around the world, specifically in Africa, West, East, or South mostly, that do journalism, kids doing journalism for other kids, so that it's already kind of pre-approved or kid-friendly. And because I'd love to keep teaching these 3rd graders while we're in our
yeah,
I'm not going to call it jail, but while we're hanging out at home.
Yeah. I would say I've heard from a lot of teachers that they use Newsela since it's you can level the text, and then also Student Reporting Labs does through PBS does training of students to do their own reporting. We have some simple reporting workshops but they wouldn't cover the content that you're describing. One thing though that we could, so those outlets I think would be good. For one way we could help is that we do have virtual, we have journalists who are prepared to do their presentations for as young as kindergarten. So we do, the virtual visits is something we can age, that we can easily adapt.
And can you repeat the first two organizations that you mentioned?
Yeah, News ELA. And then for reporting done by students, the Student Reporting Labs.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Yes, Sylvia, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that sometimes we generalize the students, their capability to understand. Sometimes my students at Oyster, I'm talking to them and I feel like they are even beyond me in terms of understanding, at least in that particular community. So there is a lot to be done with many of our youngest students that I anticipate very much being influencers very soon.
Very much agree. And maybe what I can show you, I can do a really brief intro to Everyday DC, because that's one that is really easily adaptable to younger audiences. But also for any of you who are interested in learning more about partnering with DC public schools, I can talk, it does go into that. Would that be helpful? Okay. So let me show you a few more slides. I will not go over time, I promise. Here we go. Okay, so Everyday DC. Oh, wait a minute. Have I been sharing my screen this entire time? I am so sorry. My bad. All right, well, let me show you here.
It's good.
The slides for Everyday DC. Okay, so this is a cornerstone unit. It didn't start that way. It's a visual arts department at DC Public Schools project. The way it basically started was visual arts department was rewriting their curriculum and looking for NGO partners to be anchors for culminating projects for different units. So we wrote a unit together that was aligned with one of the standards that focused on artists understanding their audience as they plan projects. It's the interaction standard in the visual arts middle school curriculum. When we heard that the idea was that students will understand the impact of audience and how they interpret art, we thought of this project we've supported called Everyday Africa. And from there, we developed the Everyday DC Photojournalism Project. Last year, we had 14 schools participate. Our first year, we had 7. So it took, this is 4 years of this project and it's grown every year, but it's been through a lot of work and support, the DC Collaborative, the DC Public Schools, and I'll show you how that happened. The general elements of the unit for students is first, they learn visual literacy skills. How do I read a picture? How do I question what's in a picture and what's not in a picture? And then how do I think about how my community is represented in pictures and why it's important for me to tell my own stories? So the first part is pretty heady. From there, and once they're like inspired to want to tell their own stories, we go into photography techniques. These lessons are taught by visual arts teachers, so the curriculum's written for them, but also we have funding from the DC Commission, and at this point now from DC Public Schools, after a couple years of doing the project, where we can bring staff from Pulitzer Center and journalists into the classroom to help co-teach. After students take photos, they learn how to caption their images and to be intentional about curating pictures into exhibits. And the reason for that is that at each school at that point, their goal is to be able to be smart about what is the picture that really tells the story I want to tell. And from there, each school actually, as a class or as a school, is able to submit 10 pictures to a culminating exhibition for all participating schools that's at a public venue. In the past 3 years, it's been at the PEPCO Edison Place Gallery in Gallery Place. Our first year, it was at the Southwest Arts Center, which used to be called the Blind Wino Gallery in Southwest. But on the left here, you see a teacher who took the unit all the way through and had students create their own exhibitions. Most schools don't get there. On the right, you see this is where most schools get to, which is enough photos to contribute to the exhibit. This is where the unit starts. Oops, it's what images come to mind when you think of Africa. This is actually a screenshot of some of the words that students at I won't say the school, but one DC public school said this year when we asked this question. And from here, we basically asked them, where are you getting your information about the African continent? And from there, they start to surface different forms of media, video, movies, news. And what we start to then say is, well, let me show you some other media that is about Africa and tell us, what stories do you think these pictures are telling about this continent? Well, sorry, we go over this too and compare, how do your answers compare to what's in Google? They're often pretty similar. And now we show them the images using visual thinking strategies. I bet many of you have used before. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Students are often really surprised, or as they start to, list what they see, we share, these are also images from the continent, and they're from Everyday Africa, which is an Instagram feed. And this is the feed that the Pulitzer Center supports. The reason we actually are involved in this project is because the journalists who created it were on a reporting grant on the end of a civil war when they came up with the idea. They just realized the images they were going to publish were only presenting a very negative image of the country they were in, the Ivory Coast. So they created Everyday Africa for all the other images that they took and just weren't getting seen because they didn't present that story about Civil War. So the feed is now actually has about 30 contributors, all who are living in or from the African continent all over. When it started, it was mostly photojournalists from other parts of the world. So it's cool that it's transitioned to now mostly African journalists. What we go over with students next is that the feed is diverse because the continent is diverse. So we go over some of the geography. We also look at a week on Everyday Africa to look at how in 1 week this place can look so different. So these are all pictures from, I think, November when I did this workshop. Throughout, we're trying to reinforce the language. What story does the image tell? What do you see? What details? And then what story do those details tell? And then basically, now what do you think? What are some of the new words that come to mind when you think of Africa? And here's that moment where you get them thinking, it's not your fault. Like there's a reason that the before words look one way and the afterwards look a different way. And it's because of what images are presented to you. And that makes me wonder this question. So then we hop on Google and we see that according to Google, our students' communities look like this. And of course, then they're like, no, that's not true, and horrified. And from there, we start to brainstorm like, okay, well, actually, we're coming to you now as journalists to help us tell the underreported story of everyday life in DC, building on our mission there. And that's sort of like the Pulitzer Center side, trying to make sure they learned a little bit about another part of the world and that they understand the role of a journalist. The visual arts side is the being able to read pictures and then taking them. So from there, I can actually show you this video that kind of covers it. So you get a break from my voice and then I can take some questions. How about that? We'll close out.
Welcome everyone to the opening night for our Everyday DC exhibit.
DC is the capital of America, but DC is not just museums, monuments, and government.
Okay. Trying to do that.
Welcome everyone to the opening night for our Everyday DC exhibit.
DC is the capital of America, but DC is not just museums, monuments, and government. DC can be musical, multicultural, and multilingual.
This year, we have had a record number of students and teachers join the event. We have over 14 schools, 140 students, and then 7 student curators. This event takes place because of the curriculum collaboration between DCPS and the Pulitzer Center. It was inspired by the Everyday Africa project that challenges the viewer to rethink their assumptions about Africa. This project helps our students understand the significance of one's own perspective. We hope, as you see this narrative of DC, that it takes you to a new level of perspective and empathy as well.
As a curator, my job was to basically figure out what central ideas we wanted people to talk about based on our photographs. And then we grouped photographs together to help shape their perspectives around city.
I've been to the classrooms
many of the teachers and students that are here tonight, and have had the pleasure of speaking with them about journalism, truth and storytelling, and the ways that photography can be used to rise above harmful misperceptions. But if I could go back in time and be told from the beginning that the project would grow into something huge and international, what would I have wanted it to become? Look around. This is what I would have hoped it would be.
People may still have stereotypes about DC, but in DC, you can write your own story. You can choose your own path, and this is ours.
Oh, here, you can see the schools who participated. And oh, thank you. And what I thought, it's not published yet, but one thing that will be published this week is because we actually had to close the exhibit this year after, like the day after opening, was when, that Monday was when the chancellor closed schools. He was actually supposed to be at the opening this year and then didn't come. We were all like, what's going on? And then that night was when we got the email about closing on Monday. But what's cool is that the gallery, it was fully curated by this year's students from Hardy. We actually finally had all 8 wards represented this year, 14 schools. So we have a virtual gallery this year where you can see the curator's remarks. If you can see this on the screen, we tried to present a few of the walls so you could see how the curators took images from different schools and grouped them, which is the ending part of the unit. And then also you can see all the images by school. What we'll also publish this week is versions of the curriculum that can be done anywhere. So we took the curriculum we worked on with DCPS and we created each lesson in a way that they could be individual lessons or they could be put together to do the unit. And this is what they'll look like when they're published. All right, that's the project. The few minutes left. Any questions about that?
Fareed, since you at Pulitzer, since you guys have been doing a lot of distance learning for a long time and virtual visits from journalists all over the world, is there any like quick, I mean, we have 3 minutes left, but are there any like quick tips or anything that you could share with people that are just trying to start now?
Yeah, quick ones. One is, if you're not working with Skype in the classroom, if you're an organization that can work across the country or across the world, Skype in the classroom is a great platform because they can help funnel requests from teachers to you. You just create a page. You have to contact them to create a page, and then they will basically advertise your page. So that's a way that we've met a lot of our teachers from other parts of the country. So Skype in the classroom is one thing. The other is we learned that we needed to do tests. First of all, figure out the platform that's right for the teacher. So we had to contact them before. And then also for new people, test the video before the journalist gets on. So after doing the test with the teacher, the next step would also then be to figure out from that teacher anything they really want to get out of the visit so that the journalist or guest speaker was prepared. We also found that visuals are really important. So teaching them how to share, teaching our speakers how to share their screen, how to come up with interactive questions, that was super important with the virtual visits. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
No, just looking forward to a whole lot more. Thank you, Fareed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
And Fareed, we have one last thing from Melissa. And just thank you so much for sharing. It's actually really inspiring, the amount of people who, like, you know, during this time are coming together and sharing resources. So we'll definitely, Fareed, I think there's some sharing settings that you have to like make it viewable to people even outside of Pulitzer for that PowerPoint. I'll share Fareed's contact, and if it's okay with you, I'll share your email and contact information in case anyone needs to get in touch. This will be in like the digest. We will do a weekly summary of all the meetings moving forward, and and I'll share this on the community of practice listserv. If anyone else wants to present, Claudia, if anyone else wants to present, please let Lissa and I know, but Fareed, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if you're free, join us at 2 to talk to Dr. Seema Yasmin. And I just put this in the chat, but I'm going to create a version of the slideshow that doesn't need access and send that to you, Tracy.
Okay, that sounds good.
Let me know if you want to collaborate. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Fareed. Thanks for sharing. I swear, this is like PD for us. It's so wonderful.